Jamal Washington cradled his bleeding wife in his arms, her pregnant belly still beneath his trembling hands. The police officers stood unmoved, one still aiming his weapon. "Just another drug dealer," one muttered. They had no idea they had just shot the wife of the most decorated black Delta Force commander in American history. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. This is a story about justice, prejudice, and the fight for truth that will leave you speechless. Hit that like button and subscribe to show your support for stories that need to be told. Now let's go back to see how this tragedy began and the remarkable events that followed. Commander Jamal Washington had spent 20 years building an impeccable military career that few civilians could comprehend. At 38, his service record included classified operations across Afghanistan, Syria, and dozens of locations he couldn't even name to his wife. 3 Purple Hearts, multiple commendations for valor, and a reputation among Delta Force operators as the man you wanted leading when situations turned impossible. Despite his accomplishments, Jamal kept his professional life separate from his personal one, rarely mentioning his rank or responsibilities when meeting neighbors or attending community events. It wasn't shame that drove this separation, but a lifetime of learning that even a uniform didn't protect a black man from prejudice. His wife, Aisha, understood this balance perfectly. At 35, she had built her own distinguished career as a pediatric surgeon at Atlanta Memorial Hospital, saving countless children with her steady hands and innovative techniques. After years of postponing family plans for their demanding careers, they had finally decided the time was right. 6 months into her pregnancy, Aisha glowed with anticipation, decorating their nursery and sending Jamal videos of the baby kicking whenever he was away on training. Their recent move to Oakwood Estates represented everything they had worked toward: a beautiful colonial home with a wraparound porch on a tree-lined street in an affluent suburb of Atlanta. The neighborhood featured excellent schools, low crime rates, and property values that had risen consistently for decades. What the real estate agent hadn't mentioned was the unspoken community expectation about who belonged there. The Washingtons were one of only 3 black families in Oakwood Estates, and the others lived on the periphery, not in the prestigious central blocks where Jamal and Aisha had purchased their dream home. The subtle hostility began almost immediately. Despite Aisha's pregnancy and Jamal's military bearing, neighbors crossed the street rather than exchange pleasantries. Community newsletters were never delivered to their door. When Aisha attended a neighborhood association meeting, she found herself sitting alone, while others clustered in familiar groups, their conversation stopping when she approached. Lawn service companies that served the entire neighborhood somehow always had scheduling conflicts when the Washingtons called. The president of the Homeowners Association, Samuel Wilson, a silver-haired former police commissioner, had personally visited to remind them about the community's standards and expectations, his eyes lingering disapprovingly on the African art pieces visible through their front window. Most concerning was the private security team that patrolled Oakwood Estates, funded by association fees and working in close coordination with local police. The security vehicles seemed to pass by the Washington home with unusual frequency, slowing to observe Jamal when he worked in the yard, or Aisha when she collected the mail. Their black SUV would idle across the street when the couple had visitors, particularly if those visitors were also black. Both Jamal and Aisha had noticed, but said little to each other, each trying to shield the other from unnecessary stress. They had faced discrimination before and were determined not to let it taint their joy about the baby. The nursery walls were painted a gentle yellow. The crib assembled tiny clothes folded neatly in drawers. Aisha had scheduled her maternity leave to begin in 1 month. Jamal had arranged for extended time off following the birth pulling strings and trading favors to ensure he would be present for those precious first weeks. It was a Wednesday night when everything changed. Jamal was away at Fort Bragg for a 3-day training exercise, something routine that had taken him away from home dozens of times before. Aisha had called earlier to tell him about strange cramping sensations that worried her. Though her doctor had assured her over the phone it was likely nothing serious, she promised to call again if anything changed. At 11:45, Jamal's phone lit up with her number. The connection was poor, her voice breaking with static, and what he soon realized was fear. Something was wrong with the baby. She was bleeding. She needed to get to the hospital immediately. Jamal was already moving toward his commanding officer to request emergency leave when the call dropped. What he didn't know was that simultaneously the Oakwood Estates security team had received a call from a neighbor reporting a suspicious woman prowling around the Washington property. Despite the woman fitting Aisha's description perfectly, the neighbor insisted it couldn't be a resident. Must be an intruder. The security team, without verifying with the Washingtons or checking their resident database, immediately called the police, reporting a possible break-in by an unknown black female suspect. As Jamal threw his gear into his car and began the 3-hour drive home, his pregnant wife was already being viewed not as a homeowner in distress, but as a criminal trespassing on someone else's property. The digital clock on Jamal's dashboard read 2:17 a.m. when he screeched into Oakwood Estates, having broken every speed limit between Fort Bragg and Atlanta. His heart stopped as he turned onto his street and saw the flashing lights. 3 police cruisers were parked haphazardly in front of his home, their aggressive positioning suggesting something far more serious than a medical emergency. Uniformed officers stood in confrontational stances, their hands hovering near their weapons. Through the red and blue strobe of police lights, Jamal saw 2 officers on his front lawn. Officer Brian Reynolds was a stocky veteran cop with 20 years on the force and 17 excessive force complaints in his file, all dismissed or settled quietly. His partner that night, Officer Jason Miller, was a 26-year-old rookie, just 4 months out of the academy, still malleable and eager to impress his senior colleagues. They had responded to a priority call about a suspected break-in, the dispatcher emphasizing the security team's report of a female suspect who likely didn't belong in the neighborhood. Reynolds had taken lead immediately, his hand resting on his holstered weapon as they approached the house. What happened next would later be pieced together through witness statements, partial body camera footage, and the traumatic fragments Aisha could recall. She had been upstairs gathering essential items for the hospital when she heard loud knocking. Wrapped in a robe over her nightgown, one hand pressing against her cramping abdomen, she made her way downstairs and opened the door to find police officers with flashlights that momentarily blinded her. Reynolds immediately began firing questions without introducing himself or explaining their presence. Where did she live? Whose house was this? Could she prove she belonged there? Could they speak to the homeowners? Aisha, already in pain and growing increasingly frightened, attempted to explain that she lived there, that she was pregnant and experiencing a medical emergency. Reynolds cut her off repeatedly, his tone making it clear he didn't believe her. When she mentioned her husband was a military officer currently away, Reynolds exchanged a skeptical look with Miller. The situation escalated when Reynolds demanded identification. Aisha explained her wallet was upstairs, but offered to show them family photos clearly visible on the entry hall table. Reynolds refused, insisting she produce government ID immediately. As the cramping intensified, Aisha reached for her phone in her robe pocket, intending to call Jamal again, or perhaps show them family photos stored there. The movement was sudden, her hand disappearing into fabric. Reynolds later claimed he saw the outline of what could have been a weapon. Without warning, without calling for her to stop, without any of the protocol that should have preceded use of deadly force, he fired twice. The first bullet grazed her shoulder. The second struck her abdomen just inches from where her unborn child was growing. This was the moment Jamal arrived, his military vehicle skidding to a stop behind the police cruisers. He leaped out, still wearing portions of his uniform, under civilian clothes, moving with the fluid urgency of someone trained for crisis. What he saw destroyed him in a way 20 years of combat never had. Aisha collapsing on their front porch, crimson spreading across her nightgown, her hands clutching protectively at her pregnant belly. Reynolds and Miller immediately swiveled weapons, now trained on Jamal, shouting commands to stop, to get down, to put his hands up. Jamal heard none of it. Every combat instinct told him to neutralize the threat, to protect his family, to apply his lethal training. But something deeper held him back, the knowledge that as a black man confronting white police officers, any aggressive move would likely end with his death, leaving Aisha and their baby with no one to fight for them. So instead, he did the hardest thing he had ever done. He raised his hands slowly, clearly, and called out, "That's my wife. She's pregnant. Please, she needs medical attention." Reynolds didn't lower his weapon. "Back away from her now," he shouted, his voice tinged with the adrenaline that follows discharging a weapon. Jamal remained focused solely on Aisha, who had slumped to a sitting position against the doorframe, her eyes wide with shock and pain. "I'm a military officer," Jamal said, his voice controlled despite the rage and fear coursing through him. "My ID is in my vehicle. Please call an ambulance. She's 6 months pregnant." Miller looked uncertain, glancing at his partner. Reynolds remained unmoved. "On the ground now," he commanded. Then under his breath, but loud enough to be heard in the quiet neighborhood, "Just another drug dealer thinking he owns the place." It was at this moment that Reynolds made his fatal miscalculation. Believing Jamal was simply another civilian he could intimidate, he approached with handcuffs while Miller kept his weapon trained on the couple. Jamal allowed himself to be cuffed, his entire being focused on getting to Aisha as quickly as possible. As soon as the cuffs clicked shut, he moved toward his wife, ignoring Reynolds's commands to stay put. The officer grabbed him roughly, but Jamal's military training made him immovable when he chose to be. He reached Aisha and dropped to his knees beside her, now cradling her with his restrained hands as best he could. "I'm here, baby," he whispered, his voice breaking for the first time. "Help is coming." Aisha's eyes found his recognition, bringing momentary clarity through her shock. "Jamal," she whispered, her voice so faint only he could hear. They never identified themselves. They just fired. Then her head lolled against his shoulder as consciousness began to slip away. Reynolds was on his radio, finally calling for an ambulance, but coding it as routine rather than emergency, describing it as a suspect with a non-life-threatening injury. "B'ni," Jamal roared at him. "She's pregnant. This is a life-threatening emergency." Miller, visibly shaken now, upgraded the call without waiting for his partner's approval. From a second-floor window across the street, Sophia Chen watched the entire scene unfold. An accountant who worked from home and often stayed up late, she had been drawn to her window by the police lights. Instinctively, she had begun recording on her phone, capturing everything from Reynolds firing at Aisha to the current moment. As neighbors began appearing on porches and lawns, drawn by the commotion, Samuel Wilson himself emerged from his home 3 doors down. Rather than showing concern, he began moving from neighbor to neighbor, speaking quietly, gesturing for people to return to their homes. Several neighbors looked conflicted, their eyes drawn to the bleeding woman and her desperate husband, but Wilson's authority in the community held sway. One by one, doors closed, curtains drew, and the witnesses retreated, leaving the Washingtons alone under the harsh police lights, with only Sophia Chen's hidden camera as silent witness to the truth. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes after being called an eternity, during which Jamal pressed his cuffed hands against Aisha's wound, whispering continuous reassurance, while his military training assessed her declining condition with clinical precision. The paramedics worked quickly, their expressions changing when they discovered she was pregnant, shooting questioning looks at the officers that went unanswered. They loaded Aisha onto a stretcher while Reynolds pulled Jamal away, directing him toward a police cruiser. "You're riding with us," he said flatly. Interfering with police business. Jamal fought to maintain his composure. "She's my wife. I need to be with her." Miller, the rookie, shifted uncomfortably but remained silent as Reynolds pushed Jamal into the back seat, ignoring his request. "You'll see her when we sort this out," Reynolds said, closing the door with unnecessary force. The ambulance pulled away, lights flashing, but sirens silent, another protocol violation that didn't escape Jamal's notice. As they followed behind at a deliberate distance, Jamal experienced a type of helplessness entirely foreign to him. In combat situations, he had always been in control, making split-second decisions that saved lives, extracting his team from impossible scenarios through sheer will and training. Now, watching his wife's ambulance through a cage divider, his hands restrained behind his back, he felt a crushing weight of impotence that threatened to unravel his carefully maintained control. Images from battlefields merged with the sight of Aisha bleeding on their porch, a Kabul hostage rescue where he'd carried a wounded child through sniper fire, a Syrian operation where he'd applied a tourniquet to a teammate while calling in air support, an extraction in Mali where he had held pressure on an informant's wound for 2 hours until medical evacuation arrived. In all those situations, he had been the solution. Now he was being treated as the problem. Atlanta Memorial Hospital emerged through the cruiser's windows, its emergency entrance blazing with light. Reynolds parked deliberately far from the entrance, adding precious minutes to their walk. Inside, the controlled chaos of the emergency department swallowed them. Medical personnel moved with practiced urgency around gurneys and equipment, barely glancing at the handcuffed black man being escorted by 2 police officers. Jamal scanned every face, every doorway, looking for any sign of Aisha. A nurse directed Reynolds toward a waiting area, pointing at Jamal with obvious assumption he was under arrest. "You can process him there. We need the trauma rooms clear." Reynolds nodded with professional courtesy, entirely absent from his interactions with Jamal. As they approached the waiting area, a tall black doctor in surgical scrubs emerged from a hallway, eyes widening at the sight of Jamal in handcuffs. "Commander Washington," he called, changing direction to intercept them. Dr. Marcus Coleman had worked alongside Aisha for 5 years, had attended their housewarming party just months earlier. His presence was the first break in the nightmare. Reynolds stiffened as the doctor approached, clearly not expecting Jamal to be recognized. "What is going on here?" Dr. Coleman demanded, his normally calm demeanor hardening as he took in Jamal's restraints and the officer's defensive posture. "This man's wife was just brought in with a gunshot wound. Why is he in handcuffs?" Reynolds stepped slightly forward. "This is a police matter, doctor. We need to question this individual about the incident." Coleman's expression made it clear he wasn't intimidated. "I need to speak with Commander Washington immediately regarding his wife's medical condition and consent for treatment. Remove those restraints now." When Reynolds hesitated, Coleman added, "Or I can call the hospital administrator and the military liaison officer we have on staff. Your choice." Something in his tone must have registered with Reynolds, who reluctantly produced the key while maintaining, "He remains in custody. We'll be right outside the door." As soon as they stepped into a small consultation room, Coleman's professional facade cracked slightly. "Jamal, what the hell happened to Aisha's in surgery right now? She has a gunshot wound to the abdomen and she's hemorrhaging." Jamal fought to keep his voice steady. "These officers shot her at our home. No warning, no provocation. She was having pregnancy complications and needed to get to the hospital. They responded to a call about a supposed break-in." His words came faster now. "How is she? The baby?" Coleman placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. The trauma team is doing everything possible. Dr. Patel is leading the surgery. She's the best we have. But Jamal, it's serious. The bullet caused significant internal damage. They're trying to stabilize her before addressing the pregnancy. The clinical assessment hit Jamal like physical blows. Coleman continued, "I need your consent to perform an emergency C-section if necessary to save either of them." Jamal signed the forms. Coleman produced his military training, taking over compartmentalizing the emotional devastation to focus on immediate actions. "I need to make some calls, and I need my ID from my vehicle to prove who I am." Coleman nodded. "I'll send someone for your ID. Use my phone for calls. I need to get back to check on Aisha, but I'll update you as soon as I can." Before leaving, he hesitated. "Jamal, there are more officers arriving. The police presence here is unusual for a shooting victim. Something's happening." Outside the consultation room, the hospital security had indeed become more complicated. Police Captain Frank Lawson had arrived, bringing an administrative weight that changed the energy of the emergency department. 55 years old, with a carefully maintained physical presence and the measured speech of someone accustomed to press conferences, Lawson moved with the authority of rank. Unlike Reynolds, whose aggression simmered visibly beneath his badge, Lawson's power was institutional, systemic, embedded in policy and procedure. He consulted briefly with Reynolds and Miller, his expression giving nothing away, as he listened to their account. Occasionally, his eyes drifted to the consultation room where Jamal waited assessment rather than hostility in his gaze. After viewing the initial report Reynolds had filed on his tablet, Lawson directed additional officers to maintain positions throughout the hospital while he made a call to Police Chief Robert Henderson. Though he maintained official protocol, those observing closely might have noticed subtle signs of discomfort. A tightness around his eyes, a slight hesitation before confirming certain details from Reynolds's report. When Dr. Coleman emerged from the surgical wing, 2 hours later, Jamal had managed to establish communication with his commanding officer. Lieutenant Colonel James Carter was already arranging transport to Atlanta with military legal counsel. Jamal's military ID had been retrieved from his vehicle, causing visible confusion among the officers who had been operating under Reynolds's characterization of him as a potential drug dealer interfering with police business. Their discomfort only increased when Jamal's Delta Force credentials were verified, revealing him to be not just military, but one of the most elite operators in American Special Forces. Captain Lawson, watching this realization spread among his officers, maintained his professional demeanor while internally reassessing the situation with increasing concern. Coleman's update was mixed. Aisha had survived the initial surgery, but her condition remained critical. The trauma team had been forced to perform an emergency C-section to save both mother and child. Their daughter, born 3 months premature and weighing just 2 pounds 4 ounces, had been transferred immediately to the neonatal intensive care unit. Both fought for their lives, separated by hospital floors, but connected by the same tenuous hold on survival. As dawn broke, casting harsh light through hospital windows, the situation grew increasingly complex. Early news reports had already begun circulating with headlines that made Jamal's blood boil: police shooting following domestic disturbance in Oakwood Estates, and suspect shot after non-compliance with officer commands. No mention of a pregnant woman, no mention of mistaken identity, no mention of a decorated military officer. Just another police shooting in America, framed to justify before investigation had even begun. What do you think about the police officers' actions so far? Comment number 1, if you believe they should be immediately suspended, or number 2, if you think we should wait for the full investigation. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support stories that expose injustice and show the real human impact of prejudice in our society. As Jamal sat beside his unconscious wife, holding her hand, while machines monitored her vital signs, the world outside the hospital room was already taking sides. Police supporters pointed to the suspicious circumstances and quick movements described in the official report. Others questioned why a pregnant woman would be perceived as a threat. But the most important question remained unanswered: would Aisha and their premature daughter survive the night? And if they did, what kind of justice awaited them in a system already working to justify their shooting? Captain Frank Lawson sat across from Police Chief Robert Henderson in the wood-paneled conference room at headquarters, the early morning sun casting long shadows across the polished table. At 60, Henderson had the weathered face of a career cop and the political instincts of someone who had navigated Atlanta's complex racial dynamics for decades. Beside him sat District Attorney William Parker, 58, whose immaculate suit and carefully neutral expression masked the rapid calculations happening behind his eyes. The three men formed a power triangle that had managed countless crises over the years, maintaining the delicate balance between policing prosecution and public perception. Today, that balance faced a significant threat. "Let's see exactly what we're dealing with," Henderson said, nodding to Lawson, who connected his tablet to the room's display system. The body camera footage began playing, showing Reynolds and Miller approaching the Washington home. Standard procedure until Aisha opened the door. Even with the camera's limited angle, her pregnant condition was unmistakable beneath her robe. Her confusion was evident as Reynolds began questioning her without identifying himself or explaining their presence. When she reached for her phone, the movement was smooth, natural, nothing that resembled drawing a weapon. Reynolds's shots came without warning, the camera shaking with the recoil. Aisha's expression of shocked betrayal as she clutched her abdomen and began collapsing was followed by Jamal's arrival, his desperate attempts to help her while following police commands, and Reynolds's clearly audible comment about another drug dealer. The three men watched in silence until the footage ended with the ambulance arrival. Henderson spoke first, his voice carefully controlled. "This is problematic." Parker leaned forward, attorney's eyes assessing damage and liability. Problematic is an understatement. We have an unwarranted shooting of a pregnant woman who turns out to be the wife of a decorated Delta Force commander. The officer failed to identify himself, failed to issue warnings, and made racist comments caught on camera. This is a multi-million-dollar lawsuit and potential criminal charges. Lawson, who had maintained professional distance until now, felt compelled to state the obvious. This was a bad shooting, Chief. Reynolds violated multiple protocols. Henderson's expression hardened. "That's not for us to determine yet, Captain. We have procedures for officer-involved shootings." The implication was clear: preserve the institutional protection that shielded officers from immediate judgment. Parker, ever the pragmatist, moved directly to damage control. "We need to get ahead of this. The body camera footage cannot become public until we've established the narrative." He turned to Lawson. "What's the status of the footage? Who has access?" "Standard procedure. It's uploaded to the secure server. Access is limited to internal affairs and command staff." Henderson nodded. "Keep it that way. Cite the ongoing investigation. No copies, no leaks." He turned to the district attorney. "Bill, we need time to work through this properly." The euphemism wasn't lost on either man. Working through it properly meant finding justification, building alternative explanations, and protecting the department. Parker understood completely. "I'll have my office prepare the standard response for officer-involved shootings. No rush to judgment, thorough investigation, full due process." The meeting shifted to tactical concerns. Reynolds and Miller were instructed to complete their reports immediately with guidance to emphasize Aisha's sudden movements and failure to comply with verbal commands, claims directly contradicted by the body camera footage they had just viewed. The neighborhood association would be contacted to provide statements supporting the officer's account of responding to legitimate community concerns. Media relationships would be leveraged to emphasize police protocol rather than the shooting itself. Every institutional gear began turning to protect the system rather than seek justice. As this machinery activated, Samuel Wilson convened an emergency meeting of the Oakwood Estates Neighborhood Association in his meticulously decorated living room. 20 influential residents sat on imported leather furniture, their worried expressions reflecting the potential impact on their exclusive community. "This situation threatens everything we've built here," Wilson began, standing before the marble fireplace like a general addressing his troops. "Property values, community safety, our relationship with the police department. We need to present a united front." A woman in expensive athleisure wear raised her hand. "But Samuel, they shot a pregnant woman. I could see the ambulance from my window. This seems different." Wilson's expression hardened. "Caroline, we don't have all the facts yet. What we do know is that these people moved into our community recently and have been, shall we say, less than forthcoming about their backgrounds. The police responded to legitimate security concerns reported by multiple residents." This was a lie. Only one neighbor had called reporting a fussy, suspicious woman to it, who was actually the homeowner. But Wilson continued building his narrative. "Our priority must be protecting Oakwood Estates. The media will try to turn this into another racial incident. We can't allow that narrative to devalue our homes or damage our reputation." He moved around the room, making eye contact with each person. "If reporters contact you, refer them to me as association president. If investigators ask questions, stick to the facts about our security protocols and community standards. Emphasize that we work closely with police to maintain the neighborhood's character." The subtext was clear. The character and standards he referred to had always been coded language for the neighborhood's predominantly white demographic. Several residents shifted uncomfortably, but none challenged Wilson directly. His position as former police commissioner carried weight, as did his connections throughout Atlanta's power structure. By meeting's end, he had effectively established the neighborhood's official position. The shooting was unfortunate, but resulted from proper security measures, not racial profiling or discrimination. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the institutional machinery continued its work. Police maintained a continuous presence ostensibly for security, but effectively monitoring visitors and conversations. Medical staff treating Aisha found themselves questioned about her condition in ways that seemed focused on potential defenses rather than care concerns. Was she sedated when admitted? Could medications have affected her memory or perception? These questions came from hospital administrators who had received calls from the city's legal department. Dr. Marcus Coleman noticed these unusual inquiries and began documenting everything in separate private notes. He had worked in Atlanta's healthcare system long enough to recognize when institutional forces were aligning against a patient. What he couldn't have anticipated was how quickly the case would expand beyond local control. By mid-afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel James Carter arrived with Captain Maria Rodriguez, a military JAG officer with extensive experience in civil-military jurisdictional conflicts. Their presence immediately altered the power dynamic. Carter, 45, with the compact build and vigilant eyes of a career special operations officer, moved through the hospital with the calm authority of someone accustomed to complex, high-stakes environments. His first action was not confrontational, but strategic, establishing a military presence in Aisha's room and the NICU, where their daughter fought for life. "We're not taking over jurisdiction," he explained to a visibly uncomfortable Captain Lawson. "We're simply ensuring proper protection for a military family in crisis." The implication was clear. While not directly challenging police authority, the military would not allow the Washingtons to face the system alone. The hospital became a microcosm of competing interests. Police officers stationed throughout the building monitored movements and conversations. Military personnel maintained positions near Aisha and the baby. Medical staff navigated both while prioritizing patient care. Reporters gathered outside, held at bay by hospital security, but persistent in their attempts to piece together the story. Through it all, Jamal maintained his position beside Aisha's bed, his training allowing him to function despite nearly 24 hours without sleep. He spoke softly to his unconscious wife, updated on their daughter's condition hourly by NICU staff, and coordinated with Carter and Rodriguez while never leaving Aisha's side. What none of the officials, medical staff, or family yet knew was that across the street from the Washingtons' home, Sophia Chen sat at her computer reviewing the video she had captured of the shooting. Unlike the body camera footage now secured on police servers, her recording showed the entire incident from an elevated, unobstructed angle. Every moment was clear. Reynolds firing without warning, Aisha collapsing Jamal's desperate compliance, the officer's callous response, and even Wilson directing neighbors back into their homes. As an accountant who specialized in financial fraud investigation, Sophia understood evidence and its power. She also understood risk. Coming forward meant potentially facing retaliation from police and ostracism from neighbors. Staying silent meant allowing injustice to proceed unchallenged. For now, she saved multiple encrypted copies of the video and waited watching news reports with growing concern as the official narrative began taking shape with no resemblance to the truth she had witnessed. 48 hours after the shooting, Jamal Washington stood at the window of Aisha's hospital room watching Atlanta's skyline shimmer in the afternoon heat. Military efficiency had transformed the space from sterile medical environment to functional command center. Secure communication equipment sat beside medical monitors. Legal documents covered the visitor's table. A rotation schedule ensured Aisha was never alone while allowing Jamal to visit their daughter in NICU. The transformation reflected Jamal's methodical response to crisis, a systematic application of resources and strategy that had made him legendary in Delta Force. Lieutenant Colonel Carter had arrived with more than legal counsel. He had brought the Washington family lawyer Benjamin Harris, a 50-year-old former military JAG officer whose transition to civilian practice specialized in cases involving service members. More importantly, Carter had activated Jamal's team. Michael Hawk Hawkins and Deshaun Doc Morris arrived without fanfare, taking positions throughout the hospital with the invisible competence that defined Delta operators. Hawk 36 combined the observational skills of a sniper with an eidetic memory that missed nothing. Doc 34 brought medical expertise alongside his combat skills, allowing him to evaluate Aisha's treatment while maintaining security. They moved through the hospital like ghosts, gathering intelligence while establishing protective coverage. Their presence was the first element of Jamal's response. The second was information gathering. While maintaining his vigil by Aisha's bedside, Jamal coordinated a comprehensive investigation into Officer Brian Reynolds. Hawk's reconnaissance revealed disturbing patterns. 17 excessive force complaints over 20 years, all involving Black or Latino subjects. None had resulted in discipline. Further digging uncovered 3 shootings, all deemed justified, with minimal investigation. Most telling was Reynolds's transfer history, moving between departments just ahead of accumulated complaints reaching critical mass. His personnel file contained commendations for proactive policing in high-risk neighborhoods, alongside supervisory notes recommending additional cultural sensitivity training that was never completed. The picture emerging was not of one rogue officer, but a system that enabled and protected problematic behavior. Equally concerning was the media response. Major news outlets reported the police department's version uncritically, a domestic disturbance call, a non-compliant subject, an unfortunate but procedurally justified shooting. Military-focused publications painted a different picture, questioning why a Delta Force commander's home would be mistaken for a crime scene, and how his pregnant wife could be perceived as a threat. Social justice organizations immediately recognized the pattern, mobilizing supporters outside the hospital and police headquarters. By the third day, community organizer Zara Johnson had established a constant presence outside Atlanta Memorial, coordinating peaceful demonstrations that gained growing media attention. 29 years old, with a master's degree in public policy and experience navigating Atlanta's complex racial dynamics, Zara brought strategic focus to public outrage. She worked with local clergy, student groups, and veterans organizations to maintain continuous but non-confrontational pressure. This isn't just another shooting. she told supporters. This is about who belongs where, about whose home is respected and whose isn't, about who gets the benefit of doubt and who gets bullets. As public pressure mounted, the institutional response intensified. Police Chief Henderson held a press conference with District Attorney Parker standing supportively beside him. "We understand the community's concerns," Henderson stated with practiced sincerity. "Officer-involved shootings are always tragic and always thoroughly investigated. We ask for patience as we gather all facts before reaching conclusions." When pressed about body camera footage, he cited ongoing investigation protocols that prevented release. When asked about Aisha's condition, he offered thoughts and prayers while emphasizing the department's commitment to transparency. The most revealing moment came when a reporter asked directly about the object Aisha had allegedly reached for. Henderson referred to a metallic object observed by the responding officer, but admitted it had not been recovered from the scene. The implication was clear: the department was constructing justification regardless of evidence. While these public maneuvers unfolded, the most significant development occurred in Aisha's hospital room. After 72 hours of unconsciousness, she opened her eyes. Dr. Coleman was checking her vitals when he noticed the change. "Aisha," he said softly, "can you hear me?" Her eyes, confused and frightened, searched the room until they found Jamal, who immediately moved to her side, taking her hand carefully to avoid disturbing IV lines. "You're in the hospital," he explained gently. "You're going to be okay." Recognition dawned slowly in her eyes, followed immediately by panic, as her free hand moved to her abdomen, finding it drastically changed. "The baby," she whispered, voice raspy from the breathing tube recently removed. Jamal squeezed her hand. "She's alive. She's fighting hard, just like her mother." The relief in Aisha's expression was momentary, quickly replaced by confusion, and then dawning horror as fragmented memories returned. "The police," she whispered. "They shot me. Why did they shoot me?" Jamal maintained calm despite the rage her question rekindled. "There was a mistake. They responded to a call about a break-in at our house. They didn't identify you as the homeowner." Aisha's medical training made her immediately aware of her condition. "How bad?" Dr. Coleman answered professionally. "The bullet caused significant internal damage. We performed emergency surgery to control hemorrhage. Odging followed by a C-section to protect both you and the baby. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Your condition is still serious, but stabilizing." Aisha processed this with remarkable composure before asking, "Our daughter." 2 pounds 4 ounces, Jamal said. "The NICU team is amazing. She's tiny but determined. Dr. Patel says she responds to my voice when I visit." Tears filled Aisha's eyes. "I want to see her." "As soon as you're stable enough to move," Coleman promised. He hesitated before adding, "Aisha, there will be people who want to talk to you about what happened. Police investigators, possibly attorneys. As your doctor, I'm advising minimal stress during your recovery." Benjamin Harris, who had been observing quietly, stepped forward. "Mrs. Washington, I'm Benjamin Harris, your family attorney. No one questions you without me present, and nothing happens until you're medically cleared." As if on cue, Captain Lawson appeared in the doorway, his expression changing when he saw Aisha was conscious. "Mrs. Washington," he began formally, "I'm Captain Frank Lawson. When you're feeling up to it, we'd like to get your statement about the incident." Harris intercepted smoothly. "Captain, my client has just regained consciousness after a traumatic injury. Medical concerns take priority over your investigation." Lawson nodded, seemingly relieved to have a reason to postpone the inevitable conflict between Aisha's account and Reynolds' report. "Of course, please let us know when her doctors approve an interview." After he departed, Aisha turned to Jamal with clearer eyes. "They never identified themselves," she said with sudden urgency. "They knocked, I answered, and they started questioning me immediately. No introduction, no explanation why they were there. When I reached for my phone, he just fired." Her statement directly contradicted Reynolds's claim that he had identified himself and issued multiple warnings before Aisha made threatening movements. Before they could discuss further, a nurse entered with urgent news. Baby Washington, not yet named, had developed breathing complications. The neonatologist requested Jamal's presence immediately. As he rushed to the NICU, the fragility of their situation crystallized. His wife remained in critical condition. His premature daughter fought for every breath, and the system responsible was already working to justify their harm rather than deliver justice. The most poignant moment came late that evening. After the baby stabilized, doctors allowed Aisha to be briefly transported to the NICU in her hospital bed. For the first time, mother and daughter were reunited, though separated by the incubator's clear walls. Aisha reached a trembling hand toward the tiny form tubes and monitors, nearly obscuring the miniature face. "She's beautiful," Aisha whispered, tears streaming down her face. "So strong already." Looking up at Jamal, determination replacing fear in her eyes, she said, "Her name is Hope, because that's what we need most, right now." The name was both prayer and declaration. As Jamal watched his wife and daughter together, surrounded by machines that maintained their fragile lives, he made a silent vow. The system that had brought them to this point would be held accountable, regardless of what institutions or individuals stood in the way. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, a police department prosecutor's office and neighborhood association working to maintain their version of events. On the other, a Delta Force commander, his military team, growing community support, and a family fighting not just for recovery, but for truth. The question remaining was what evidence would ultimately emerge to determine which side prevailed. Sophia Chen had always considered herself apolitical, someone who respected authority and maintained a comfortable distance from controversy. As an accountant specializing in fraud investigation, she dealt in verifiable facts and documented patterns, approaching problems with analytical precision rather than emotional investment. But the video on her computer had shattered that comfortable neutrality. For 5 days she had watched the official narrative diverge increasingly from what she had witnessed. Police department statements describing warnings that were never given. News reports referencing a metallic object that never existed. Neighborhood association representatives characterizing the Washingtons as uncooperative residents when she had observed their unfailing politeness despite the community's cold reception. The cognitive dissonance became unbearable when she saw Samuel Wilson interviewed on local news, expressing deep concern about the unfortunate incident, while emphasizing the neighborhood's commitment to security. The same man who had directed neighbors back into their homes rather than help a bleeding pregnant woman. The same man who had organized an emergency association meeting to establish their unified response. The same man who had personally visited several residents, including her, to discuss the importance of community solidarity during this sensitive time. His visit to her apartment had been particularly unsettling. Though framed as neighborly concern, his questions about whether she had seen anything carried unmistakable undertones of intimidation. When she mentioned possibly having observed part of the incident, his demeanor shifted subtly. "Eyewitness accounts can be so unreliable," he said with practiced authority, "especially at night through windows with police lights causing visual distortion. Better to leave statements to those with proper training to interpret events." The implied warning was clear. On the 7th day after the shooting, Sophia made her decision. Rather than approaching the police department where the video might mysteriously disappear, she contacted Benjamin Harris, whose name she had learned from news coverage of the case. Their meeting took place in a private room at the hospital security provided by Hawk and Doc, whose unobtrusive presence nevertheless conveyed unmistakable capability. Harris viewed the video, once his professional composure momentarily cracking at the clarity of what it showed. "This changes everything," he said quietly, looking up at Sophia. "You understand what coming forward means. There will be significant pressure from multiple directions." Sophia nodded. I analyze fraud for a living, Mr. Harris. I recognize patterns of deception and cover-up. What's happening here is textbook institutional protection at the expense of truth. I can't be part of that, even passively. Her evidence became the cornerstone of what quickly developed into a comprehensive case. While Harris secured her video and formal statement, Lieutenant Colonel Carter activated military resources that civilian authorities couldn't easily access. Using connections at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, he obtained satellite imagery of the Washington home from the night of the shooting. The thermal mapping clearly showed Aisha moving within the house before police arrival, contradicting claims she had been outside, behaving suspiciously. Timestamps aligned perfectly with her medical emergency and calls to Jamal. Meanwhile, Hawk and Doc pursued their own investigation into Officer Reynolds and the Oakwood Estates Neighborhood Association. What they uncovered went beyond individual prejudice to systematic discrimination. Reynolds and Samuel Wilson shared membership in an exclusive hunting club known for its restrictive policies and subtle connections to groups advocating neighborhood preservation, a euphemism for maintaining racial homogeneity. Financial records showed Wilson had personally approved security expenditures targeting specific areas of Oakwood Estates, coinciding precisely with where Black and Latino families had purchased homes. Most damning were the patterns they discovered in police response within the neighborhood. Calls from white residents received priority coding and respectful interaction. Calls involving minorities or their visitors triggered heightened tactical responses and aggressive questioning. Over 3 years, 6 Black families had moved into Oakwood Estates. 4 had sold their homes within 18 months, citing community fit in exit interviews with realtors. The 2 remaining families lived on the neighborhood's periphery and reported multiple incidents of security checks and police misunderstandings. As this evidence accumulated, Aisha's condition improved enough for her to provide a formal statement. With Dr. Coleman ensuring the interview remained within medical guidelines, and Benjamin Harris documenting every word, she recounted the events with the precise observation of both a surgeon and victim. I was experiencing cramping and bleeding. I called Jamal and then began gathering what I needed for the hospital. When I heard knocking, I assumed it might be a neighbor coming to help. Instead, it was 2 police officers. They never identified themselves as police. They immediately began questioning who I was and what I was doing there. When I explained I lived there and was experiencing a medical emergency, the older officer became more aggressive, demanding identification immediately. I reached for my phone to call Jamal again or show family photos. That's when he shot me. No warning, no commands to stop, just fired directly at me. Her statement was corroborated by the most unexpected source. Dr. Coleman discovered discrepancies in Aisha's initial medical report. The emergency department documentation noted, patient states she was shot without warning while reaching for phone. But this crucial detail was absent from the official record provided to police. Further investigation revealed that hospital administrators had directed certain subjective elements be removed from reports shared with law enforcement citing liability concerns. Coleman's meticulous personal notes preserved the original statements, providing another layer of evidence contradicting the official narrative. The most dramatic development came from the NICU, where baby Hope showed remarkable resilience. Against medical predictions, her respiratory function stabilized, allowing reduction in ventilator support. During a rare moment when both parents could visit simultaneously, Aisha in a wheelchair, beside Jamal, the neonatologist described it as extraordinary determination, looking at their tiny daughter hands not much larger than Jamal's thumbnail, but gripping his finger with surprising strength. Aisha whispered, "She's fighting for justice too." That same afternoon, District Attorney William Parker contacted Captain Lawson about arranging a private meeting with the Washington's attorney. Though framed as procedural, the request carried unmistakable subtext. Parker was looking for a resolution before the case exploded beyond containment. What he didn't know was that Harris had already prepared comprehensive civil rights lawsuits against the police department individual officers, the City of Atlanta, the Oakwood Estates Neighborhood Association, and several officials individually. The evidence package supporting these actions included Sophia's video satellite imagery documentation of discriminatory patterns, medical records, witness statements, and expert analyses of police protocol violations. Most significantly, it included Officer Reynolds's body camera footage, which Harris had obtained through a confidential source within the department, someone whose conscience had finally outweighed institutional loyalty. What do you think about Sophia Chen's decision to come forward with her video evidence? Comment number 1, if you believe she did the right thing despite the personal risks, or number 2, if you think she should have stayed neutral in this conflict. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about justice and accountability in America. The question now facing all parties was whether this case would proceed through public legal channels with the explosive evidence exposed for everyone to see, or whether institutional forces would recognize the inevitability of truth and seek resolution before their complicity became indefensible. For Jamal and Aisha, watching their daughter fight hour by hour while recovering from physical and emotional trauma, the question was simpler. How would justice be defined in a system that had already demonstrated its willingness to sacrifice truth for self-preservation? With each piece of evidence strengthening their position, the balance of power was shifting. But the most dramatic confrontation still lay ahead as those responsible for the shooting and subsequent cover-up realized their carefully constructed narrative was collapsing beneath the weight of irrefutable proof. By the second week following the shooting, Atlanta had become the epicenter of a national conversation about race policing and justice. What began as localized protests outside the hospital and police headquarters had expanded to demonstrations in multiple cities, with veterans groups showing particularly strong support for the Washington family. National media descended on Atlanta, transforming local coverage into headline news and social media trending topics. For those inside the hospital, this expanding spotlight created both protection and pressure. The Washington family's private crisis now carried public significance that deterred institutional misconduct but intensified scrutiny of their every decision. Jamal received this dual-edged visibility with the same tactical assessment he brought to combat operations, recognizing both strategic advantages and potential vulnerabilities. Most concerning were the death threats which began arriving via social media and hospital switchboard almost immediately after military publications identified him as Delta Force. White supremacist groups, police extremists, and anonymous trolls targeted both Washingtons with graphic threats that security teams took seriously. Simultaneously, messages of support poured in from military communities, medical professionals, civil rights organizations, and ordinary citizens moved by their story. Former Delta operators from across the country made their presence known in subtle ways familiar only to those within that elite community. Atlanta Memorial staff began noticing unfamiliar individuals in hospital corridors who moved with distinctive purpose and disappeared before security could question them. These unofficial guardians supplemented the formal protection provided by Hawk Doc and military police officially assigned to the family. The most visible pressure centered on the police department and city administration. Police Chief Henderson maintained the official position that proper procedures had been followed, but cracks in institutional unity began appearing. Reynolds and Miller were placed on administrative leave described as standard protocol during officer-involved shooting investigations, rather than acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The police union immediately issued statements supporting the officers and criticizing rush to judgment before all facts are known. Yet behind these public positions, internal assessments had grown increasingly pessimistic. Captain Lawson, whose discomfort with the case had been evident from the beginning, requested a private meeting with Jamal. It took place in a secure hospital conference room with Benjamin Harris present and recording. Commander Washington, Lawson began formally. I want to express my personal regret about what happened to your family. This is not how police work should be conducted." The careful phrasing acknowledged the wrong without accepting liability, but his next statement ventured further than institutional protection typically allowed. "I believe there were serious procedural violations that night. I can't officially comment on ongoing investigations, but I want you to know not everyone in the department supports how this has been handled." The meeting marked a pivotal development. Someone within command structure was signaling willingness to break ranks. Harris leveraged this opening immediately, providing Lawson with a carefully curated selection of their evidence without revealing their full position. "Captain, we appreciate your integrity. You should know we have comprehensive documentation contradicting the official narrative, including video evidence from multiple sources. We're preparing for full legal proceedings but remain open to resolution approaches that deliver genuine accountability and justice." Though Lawson made no explicit commitments, his body language conveyed clear understanding. The department's position was becoming untenable. As this institutional pressure built, the FBI formally opened a civil rights investigation, sending agents to interview witnesses and collect evidence independent of local authorities. Their arrival escalated tensions within Atlanta's power structure, with federal jurisdiction threatening local control of the narrative. District Attorney Parker, recognizing the shifting dynamics, intensified his behind-the-scenes efforts to negotiate resolution before federal intervention rendered him irrelevant. His approaches to Harris grew increasingly direct, moving from procedural discussions to explicit settlement frameworks with significant financial compensation. Harris relayed these offers to Jamal and Aisha with professional thoroughness, but added his own assessment. "They're trying to buy silence before the full truth emerges. The numbers will keep increasing as their position weakens." Aisha now recovered enough for extended conversations, though still requiring significant medical support, was unequivocal. "This was never about money. This is about accountability and preventing this from happening to other families. No settlement without structural change and personal accountability." Jamal supported her position completely. "We have the resources and platform to fight this through. Most victims of police misconduct don't. We owe it to them to push for real change, not just personal compensation." Their unity on this principle would be tested as external pressures intensified from unexpected directions. Samuel Wilson and the Oakwood Estates Neighborhood Association launched what could only be described as a coordinated smear campaign. Through carefully worded statements to friendly media outlets, they characterized the Washingtons as uncooperative residents who repeatedly violated community standards without specifying what standards had allegedly been breached. More insidiously, they began suggesting the couple had somehow provoked the police response through unspecified behaviors that had concerned multiple neighbors, another claim without factual support. When these insinuations gained traction in certain media segments, Zara Johnson organized a powerful response. Her experience navigating Atlanta's complex racial politics proved invaluable as she coordinated a candlelight vigil outside the hospital that drew thousands of supporters. The diverse crowd included veterans and uniformed medical professionals in scrubs, community advocates, and ordinary citizens. Their silent presence, illuminated only by candles as evening fell, created powerful imagery that dominated news coverage and social media. The contrast between this dignified demonstration and the neighborhood association's increasingly desperate accusations shifted public perception decisively. Most significantly, Officer Jason Miller, the rookie partner who had been present during the shooting, began showing signs of breaking under pressure. During a mandatory psychological evaluation, he expressed concerns about the accuracy of the official report, a statement that quickly reached Captain Lawson through departmental channels. Though Miller hadn't yet formally contradicted Reynolds's account, his wavering loyalty represented a critical vulnerability in the department's unified front. Reynolds himself remained defiant, supported by the police union and certain community segments. His 20 years on the force had built connections throughout Atlanta's law enforcement structure, and those relationships now activated to protect one of their own. Yet even his supporters grew uncomfortable as evidence of his past misconduct emerged through media investigations. The 17 excessive force complaints previously buried in personnel files became public knowledge, along with documented patterns of disproportionate aggression toward minority suspects. While these institutional battles unfolded, the Washington family experienced both progress and setbacks in their personal fight. Aisha's physical recovery continued steadily, though psychological healing proved more challenging. Nightmares and flashbacks disrupted her sleep, while anxiety spiked whenever uniformed officers appeared near her room. Despite these struggles, she insisted on being wheeled to the NICU daily to spend time with Hope, whose condition fluctuated with the precarious volatility common to severely premature infants. On day 12, Aisha was finally able to hold her daughter for the first time, the tiny bundle carefully transferred from incubator to mother's chest in a moment of profound connection. For 20 minutes, machines and monitors temporarily receded as mother and daughter breathed in synchronized rhythm. Jamal, watching his wife cradle their child with tears streaming unchecked down his face, experienced a momentary clarity that cut through the legal strategies and public relations. This was what they were fighting for, not just accountability for past wrongs, but the secure future their daughter deserved. That clarity was tested later the same day when Hope suffered a serious respiratory setback, requiring increased ventilator support and specialized medication. The neonatologist explained such fluctuations were common in premature infants, but acknowledged the severity was concerning. As Jamal maintained his vigil between his wife's room and the NICU, Benjamin Harris arrived with critical news. Their legal team had completed preparations for comprehensive federal civil rights lawsuits against all parties involved in the shooting and subsequent cover-up. Filing these actions would move the case irrevocably into public record, with all evidence becoming accessible to media and public scrutiny. Simultaneously, the FBI investigation had progressed to the point where criminal civil rights charges against Reynolds were being seriously considered. The convergence of these developments created a decision point for the Washington family: pursue full legal accountability through transparent proceedings, or consider settlement options that might deliver faster results with less public exposure. For Jamal, whose military career had required balancing strategic objectives against tactical realities, the decision framework was clear. What delivers justice while protecting our family? What creates meaningful change rather than just punishment? What honors what Aisha and Hope have suffered while securing their future? These questions would guide their next steps as pressure continued mounting from all directions, pushing toward the inevitable breaking point where truth could no longer be contained and accountability could no longer be avoided. 22 days after the shooting, at precisely 9:15 a.m., Sophia Chen's video appeared simultaneously on multiple social media platforms. The anonymous accounts that posted it included no identifying information, no commentary, and no editing. Just 2 minutes and 37 seconds of unaltered footage showing exactly what had happened on the Washington's front porch. By 9:30, it had been viewed 100,000 times. By noon, over 2 million. By evening, the video had spread globally, been incorporated into news broadcasts analyzed by legal experts, and transformed the case from local controversy to international symbol. The leak was not Benjamin Harris's strategy. Though the video strengthened their legal position immeasurably, he had intended to use it first in court filings where its authenticity could be legally established. Now it existed in the wild subject to claims of manipulation or fabrication. Yet the raw power of the images overwhelmed such concerns. Reynolds firing without warning, Aisha collapsing visibly pregnant, Jamal's desperate compliance despite his wife bleeding before him. The officer's callous response. No context or explanation could justify what the world now witnessed directly. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protests expanded beyond Atlanta to major cities nationwide. Military veterans organizations issued formal statements supporting the Washington family and demanding accountability. Medical associations condemned the treatment of a pregnant woman and the delayed emergency response. Civil rights leaders pointed to the case as definitive evidence of systemic problems in policing and housing discrimination. Social media exploded with outrage analysis and calls for justice. The hashtags #JusticeForAisha and #HopeWashington trending globally. Institutional response proved equally dramatic. Police Chief Henderson and District Attorney Parker hastily called a press conference attempting damage control with prepared statements about disturbing footage requiring thorough investigation and promises of complete transparency moving forward. Their efforts collapsed spectacularly when reporters presented evidence contradicting their claims in real time. When Henderson referred to the ongoing investigation that began immediately after the incident, journalists displayed internal department emails showing instructions to delay and minimize the investigation. When Parker claimed, "We have always treated this case with appropriate seriousness," reporters quoted his earlier statements dismissing concerns as premature and politically motivated. The press conference disintegrated into chaos, ending with both officials retreating without taking further questions. Within hours, Atlanta's mayor announced the formation of an independent investigation panel with subpoena power and a mandate to examine not just the shooting, but the subsequent handling of evidence and public statements. For Officer Jason Miller, the video's release proved the breaking point. Having observed the department's response from within while struggling with his own conscience, the public exposure of what he had witnessed firsthand forced his decision. Through his attorney, he contacted federal prosecutors, offering testimony against Reynolds in exchange for immunity from prosecution. His statement, quickly leaked to media, provided devastating insider confirmation. Officer Reynolds never identified himself as police. He never issued warnings before firing. He made racist comments about Commander Washington, and afterward he coached me on filing reports that didn't match what actually happened. Miller's testimony extended beyond the shooting itself to systematic discrimination within the department. He described unofficial but clearly communicated policies for handling calls from Oakwood Estates with specific instructions about maintaining community standards and extra attention to non-traditional residents, euphemisms clearly targeting minority homeowners. He confirmed the close relationship between Samuel Wilson and department leadership, including social connections and unofficial meetings where neighborhood concerns were discussed without formal documentation. Most significantly, Miller revealed that Reynolds had received a call from Wilson himself shortly before responding to the Washington home, a communication that never appeared in official records. The rookie's testimony triggered a cascade of revelations. Captain Lawson, recognizing the inevitable collapse of the department's position, transitioned from reluctant insider to active whistleblower. He provided investigators with internal communications documenting the cover-up from its earliest moments, the suppressed body camera footage, altered reports, coaching of officers, and coordination with the district attorney's office to manage public perception. His evidence implicated leadership at the highest levels, showing explicit awareness of Reynolds' misconduct and deliberate decisions to protect both the officer and the department rather than pursue truth. As these institutional betrayals became public, Reynolds himself was arrested on multiple charges, including attempted murder, civil rights violations, filing false reports, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. His booking photo quick flashed through department systems before the official record could be suppressed, adding visual punctuation to the collapse of his reputation and career. The neighborhood association faced similar disintegration. FBI agents executed search warrants at Samuel Wilson's home, and the association offices seizing documents, computers, and phones. Preliminary findings indicated patterns of discriminatory practices extending far beyond the Washington case, with evidence suggesting coordinated efforts to discourage minority homeownership through selective enforcement of community standards, targeted security responses, and facilitation of hostile environments. Wilson and several board members faced conspiracy charges with federal prosecutors considering additional civil rights violations. For most outside observers, these developments represented justice in progress, the system finally responding to undeniable evidence of misconduct. For the Washington family, however, the public vindication coincided with their most personal crisis. On the morning the video went viral, Aisha's condition suddenly deteriorated. What began as elevated blood pressure and headaches rapidly progressed to seizures diagnosed as eclampsia, a dangerous pregnancy complication that sometimes occurs even after delivery. Dr. Coleman and specialists worked frantically to stabilize her condition, eventually succeeding, but leaving her weakened and requiring intensive monitoring. Simultaneously, baby Hope experienced respiratory distress, requiring increased intervention. The medical team described it as common volatility in premature infants. But the timing created unbearable pressure on Jamal, who found himself literally running between hospital floors, dividing his attention between his wife's renewed fight for life and his daughter's fragile struggle. In this moment of maximum vulnerability, Benjamin Harris continued managing the legal and public dimensions, shielding the family from unnecessary intrusion while advancing their interests. The evidence now public had transformed settlement discussions entirely. Where previously the city had offered compensation with minimal accountability, now they proposed comprehensive reforms alongside significant financial redress. Police department leadership faced restructuring. New training protocols, accountability measures, and community oversight were on the table. Reynolds and others directly involved would face criminal prosecution without departmental protection. The neighborhood association would be disbanded, with housing discrimination investigations expanding to similar communities throughout the region. For the first time, Harris brought settlement terms to the Washingtons that potentially delivered the substantive justice they had insisted upon, rather than merely financial compensation. Jamal and Aisha, consulting from separate hospital rooms due to her condition, found themselves weighing resolution against continued fight. The most poignant moment in this period came unexpectedly. As Jamal sat beside Hope's incubator speaking softly to his daughter about resilience and justice, a nurse approached with news that seemed miraculous against the backdrop of crisis. Hope had stabilized enough to breathe without ventilator support for short periods. More significantly, she had gained enough strength to be held outside the incubator for longer intervals. "Would you like to hold your daughter, Commander?" the nurse asked. For 20 minutes, Jamal cradled Hope against his chest, the tiny form seeming impossibly fragile, yet undeniably determined. Her eyes, opened briefly, seemed to focus on his face with an intensity that transcended her physical vulnerability. In that connection, Jamal found clarity about the path forward. When he returned to Aisha's room, finding her awake and alert for the first time since her seizures, their discussion focused not on punishment for those responsible, but on the structural changes that would prevent other families from experiencing similar trauma. "We have a platform and resources most victims don't," Aisha said, her voice weak, but conviction strong. "We can insist on real change, not just consequences for individuals." Their decision, communicated to Harris the following morning, prioritized systemic reform over maximum penalties. They would accept settlement terms that guaranteed substantial policy changes, community oversight mechanisms, and accountability structures alongside appropriate compensation and individual consequences for those directly responsible. This resolution approach, when presented to city officials, created the framework for unprecedented reforms reaching far beyond the Washington case to address patterns of discrimination throughout Atlanta's law enforcement and housing systems. As these negotiations progressed toward formal agreement, Hope Washington reached another milestone. For the first time since her premature birth, both parents were able to hold her together, creating a family circle that had seemed impossible in the chaotic aftermath of the shooting. As Aisha cradled their daughter with Jamal's arms supporting them both, the monitors showed hope's strongest vital signs, yet evidence of the mysterious but undeniable healing power of connection and love. This moment of family unity, captured in a single photograph taken by Dr. Coleman and later shared with permission, became a powerful symbol of resilience and hope amid systemic injustice, a visual counterpoint to the shooting video that continued spreading worldwide. The image of Jamal and Aisha holding their daughter, all three survivors of institutional violence, yet unbroken by it, communicated something essential about the human capacity to endure, to heal, and ultimately to transform suffering into positive change. 6 months after the shooting that nearly claimed 3 lives, Atlanta's autumn painted the city in vibrant oranges and reds as the Washington family gathered on their front porch. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. This space where violence had erupted and blood had spilled was being reclaimed as a place of community and healing. Aisha sat in a comfortable chair, her physical recovery nearly complete, though she would always carry internal scars, both literal and figurative. Beside her, Jamal stood with the watchful attentiveness that had defined their relationship since the shooting, his protective instincts permanently heightened by what they had endured. And between them, the miracle that had emerged from tragedy, 6-month-old Hope Washington, now a healthy 14 pounds, her bright eyes taking in the gathering with the intense curiosity that had already become her signature trait. The journey to this moment had been neither simple nor guaranteed. In the months following the video's release and subsequent institutional collapse, justice had proceeded through multiple channels with varying degrees of satisfaction. Officer Brian Reynolds had faced both criminal trial and internal review, resulting in conviction on all charges and a 30-year sentence without possibility of early parole. The evidence against him had proven overwhelming. Sophia Chen's video body camera footage, witness testimony, and most significantly, Officer Miller's comprehensive account of both the shooting and subsequent cover-up attempts. Miller himself had received 5 years probation and permanent disqualification from law enforcement in exchange for his cooperation, a consequence many viewed as insufficient but strategically necessary to secure Reynolds's conviction. Throughout Atlanta's power structure, accountability had rippled outward from the case's epicenter. Police Chief Henderson and District Attorney Parker had resigned in disgrace, with Parker subsequently facing obstruction of justice charges for his role in suppressing evidence. Captain Lawson, whose eventual whistleblowing had helped break the case open, had been appointed interim police chief with a mandate to implement comprehensive reforms. His first official act had been a department-wide audit of excessive force complaints, resulting in the termination of 7 officers with patterns similar to Reynolds and mandatory retraining for dozens more. The Oakwood Estates Neighborhood Association had been disbanded following federal investigation that revealed systematic discrimination extending back years. Samuel Wilson and 6 board members faced civil penalties for housing discrimination, with criminal conspiracy charges still pending. Most homeowners, confronted with irrefutable evidence of the community's toxic culture, had chosen to distance themselves from previous leadership and to participate in neighborhood reconciliation efforts. The Washington family had received a record $22 million settlement from the city, with additional compensation from the neighborhood association's insurance. True to their values, they had donated half to establish the Hope Justice Foundation, focused on addressing racial bias in policing, healthcare access disparities, and housing discrimination. The foundation had already funded body camera programs for 3 smaller departments: implicit bias training for medical professionals and legal support for victims of housing discrimination. Perhaps most significantly, the Washington case had catalyzed policy changes extending far beyond Atlanta. Police departments nationwide had revised protocols for responding to calls involving potential racial bias. Medical facilities had implemented new standards for treating victims of police violence, emphasizing patient advocacy over institutional deference. Housing authorities had strengthened enforcement of anti-discrimination laws, with particular attention to subtle forms of exclusion in affluent communities. On the personal level, the Washingtons had faced the question that confronts many victims of high-profile injustice, whether to retreat from public view or leverage their involuntary platform for continued advocacy. Their decision reflected both their professional backgrounds and the values that had guided them before tragedy thrust them into the spotlight. Jamal had accepted a Pentagon position developing training programs addressing racial bias in military and police cooperation, his combat experience, and personal trauma, creating unique credibility with both audiences. Aisha had returned to surgical practice part-time while serving as medical director for a community clinic serving underinsured patients, her experience as both doctor and patient informing her approach to healthcare equity. Most courageously, they had decided to remain in their Oakwood Estates home rather than retreat to a less complicated environment. Moving would send the wrong message, Aisha had explained when questioned about this choice. We belong here. Our presence reminds everyone that diversity isn't just something to tolerate, it strengthens communities when embraced authentically. This philosophy had guided their approach to community rebuilding. The gathering on their porch this autumn afternoon represented the culmination of months of difficult conversations, reconciliation efforts, and gradual trust building with neighbors who had remained or moved in after the neighborhood's transformation. New families had arrived, drawn by significantly reduced property values and the opportunity to create a genuinely inclusive community from the ashes of the previous culture. Today's celebration brought together these new neighbors alongside the Washingtons' military family medical colleagues, legal team, and community advocates who had supported them throughout their ordeal. Sophia Chen, whose courage had helped break the case open, sat near Aisha. Their unlikely friendship one of the positive developments emerging from tragedy. Zara Johnson, whose organizing had maintained public pressure during critical periods, discussed community engagement strategies with newer residents. Lieutenant Colonel Carter and members of Jamal's Delta Force team maintained their characteristic watchful presence, their protective instincts neither diminished by time nor diluted by the celebration's positive energy. Dr. Coleman, who had become Hope's pediatrician after her discharge from NICU, monitored her development with both professional assessment and personal investment. Benjamin Harris, whose legal strategy had helped transform individual justice into systemic change, enjoyed rare relaxation among clients who had become friends. As evening approached, Jamal gathered everyone's attention for a brief but heartfelt address. 6 months ago, our family experienced the worst that humanity can offer: prejudice, violence, institutional betrayal. Today, we're celebrating the best that humanity can achieve: justice, healing, community, and hope. He looked down at his daughter securely cradled in Aisha's arms. Hope's name was always more than just a name. It was a declaration of faith in the possibility of change even in the darkest moments. Each of you here today in different ways helped transform that possibility into reality. Aisha continued where he left off, her surgeon's precision applied now to emotional truth rather than physical healing. We won't pretend the journey is complete. Justice is never finished. It requires constant vigilance and renewed commitment. Discrimination doesn't disappear through single victories. It retreats, regroups, and returns in new forms. But today we're celebrating progress that seemed impossible 6 months ago, and renewing our commitment to continue the work tomorrow. As twilight settled over Atlanta, the gathering transitioned from formal celebration to comfortable community. Children played on the lawn where police cruisers had once parked with aggressive intention. Conversations flowed between people whose paths might never have crossed without the gravitational pull of the Washington case. Music replaced the sirens that had previously defined this space in public memory. And at the center of it all, a family that had been fractured by institutional violence now stood whole again, their personal healing intertwined with broader social transformation. Later that evening, after guests had departed and hope had been settled into her crib, Jamal and Aisha returned to the porch alone. Sitting together in comfortable silence, they watched fireflies illuminate the autumn darkness, nature's reminder that light persists even in shadow. Without needing to articulate it, both recognized that their story had become something larger than themselves, a testament to resilience, a blueprint for accountability, and most importantly, a foundation for hope in all the word's meanings. The journey had transformed them individually and as a family. It had also created ripples of change, extending far beyond their personal experience. As they sat hand in hand on the porch where tragedy had struck, they embodied the possibility that justice, while never perfect or complete, remains worth fighting for. And in their daughter's name and future, they had found the most powerful reason to continue that fight for as long as necessary. What would you do if you were in Jamal and Aisha's position? Would you have stayed in the community to create change from within, or moved somewhere new for a fresh start? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to help spread awareness about the importance of justice and accountability in our society. Thank you for joining us for this powerful story of tragedy, resilience, and hope. Remember that positive change often begins with ordinary people making extraordinary choices in the face of injustice. Shots in the Night reveals profound truths about justice in America. When systems fail, individual courage becomes essential, from Sophia Chen risking community backlash to Officer Miller breaking ranks with his department. The Washington family shows that justice requires both persistence and strategic thinking. They understood that true change demands more than punishment for individuals. It requires transforming the systems that enable discrimination. The story demonstrates how prejudice operates on multiple levels, from neighborhood associations to police departments to hospital administrators, creating interlocking barriers against equality. These systems protect themselves instinctively, prioritizing institutional preservation over truth. Yet the story also illustrates that accountability is possible when evidence becomes undeniable and pressure remains consistent. Video documentation, witness testimony, and institutional whistleblowers together created irrefutable proof that overcame official denials. Perhaps most importantly, the Washingtons teach us that healing and justice work together. By remaining in their community rather than fleeing, they transformed a space of trauma into one of reconciliation. By establishing their foundation, they converted personal suffering into structural change. The birth of hope, both the child and the concept, reminds us that even in our darkest moments, possibility remains. Justice may never be perfect or complete, but it always remains worth fighting for, especially for those who will inherit the world we create today. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and had to make the difficult choice about whether to speak up? What would you have done in Sophia Chen's position when she saw the truth being buried, or in Jamal and Aisha's place when they had to decide between personal healing and fighting for systemic change? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters in this ongoing conversation about justice in America. If this story moved you, please hit the like button to help it reach more viewers who need to hear these important truths. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose injustice and celebrate resilience in the face of adversity. And if you know someone who would find strength or understanding from the Washington's journey, share this video with them. Thank you for bearing witness to this story of tragedy transformed into hope. May we all find the courage to stand for truth when it matters most, and the wisdom to transform our communities into places where everyone belongs.